You're listening to the Females in Finance Meet the Author Show with host, male ally and author, Tony Stewart. On Meet the Author, Tony will interview diverse authors so you can discover new financial and leadership strategies for women and male allies in the financial services community. This episode is proudly presented by Paperwork. Be prepared for life.
Welcome to the Females in Finance Meet the Author series sponsored by Paperwork. I'm your host, Tony Stewart. I'm pleased to be joined today by Eric Brotman. Good morning, Eric.
Hi, Tony. How are you?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
Doing great. Enjoying the irony that a Females in Finance podcast is hosted and guested by two gentlemen today.
Well, we're male allies. So,
correct. Absolutely.
And proud to support Females in Finance. So,
absolutely.
In this episode, we'll be discussing Eric's book, Graduate, Building a Path to Financial Freedom and Retirement at Any Age, along with Eric's podcast, Don't Retire, Graduate. Eric, let's get into it. I always like to start at the beginning. So if you can share with us your origin story and how you got started in financial services.
I came into financial services the traditional way. I was an English major and studied English and psychology, graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in late 18th century Romantic poetry, which, as you know, is a direct line to the financial world. That's a true story. Actually, I worked for a major brokerage firm right out of college, and I was in the legal department because, like most English majors, are either going to go they're either going to be authors, or they're going to be lawyers, or they're going to be teachers, or they're looking for some graduate education. And so I spent some time in the legal department. I fell in love with the brokerage business, absolutely fell in love with it, and was enthusiastic about it. The problem was everyone I was working with at the time was already under duress. They were already dealing with the loss of a loved one, or someone's incompetency or incapacitation. And I couldn't help them. All I could do was tell them what the next steps were. And it was too late to help them plan. And so I learned that I wanted to do financial and estate planning pretty early in my career, and actually went and worked for a life insurance company for 5 years and learned the estate planning business and got all the designations that I could get, the CLU and the CHFC and the CFP and so forth. And then in 1999, with a more senior advisor, started a firm and spent 4 years at that firm, learning the ropes. And in 2003, went off on my own. We called it more of a graduation than a divorce. We were looking to do different things professionally. We're still dear friends. But I launched a startup in 2003 and hired one full-time and one part-time person. And that was 18 years ago. And now we've been growing for almost 20 years. It's great.
Well, that's fantastic. And I noticed that you use the word graduation there, and that the word graduation comes into play, of course, in your podcast and with your book. Is how do you see that term working?
I think graduating is something that we all can wrap our head around. We understand it. We know that it's the end of something, but more importantly, it's the beginning of something, hopefully something better. So when I look at changing firms or changing careers, I look at it as a graduation. When I look at it as for retirement, I think retirement, the way it's been traditionally set up, is tragic. I can't imagine spending 40 or 45 years building an incredible career and life and vitae, and then suddenly doing nothing for what could be 30 years. There's not enough golf courses. There's not enough shuffleboard. One can only watch so much daytime TV. And what happens is people who don't have a life plan when they retire, even if they're financially in great shape, if they don't have a reason to get out of bed every morning, if they don't have purpose, they stop getting out of bed every morning, they don't thrive. So to me, that's an awful way to end a life well lived. I think it's much better to say I'm graduating from full-time work or from this career and moving on to something else. So I define retirement as the absence of needing to work, not the absence of work. And therefore it's really a metaphor for financial independence.
Well, that's great. And I think that's a nice philosophy and way of approaching things, is, because we all face transitions. in our lives. And, it's the context that you put it into.
It is, and you look at people who've done it successfully. I mean, we've been working with hundreds of families across the country for decades. We've seen the people who save every penny and wait for the rainy day to take the trip, and then one of the spouses dies or somebody gets sick and they never take it. And they're worth all kinds of money, and it's just the saddest way to go out. We've seen other people with relatively modest incomes who've built significant net worths and lived a life that was richer than most lives. And it wasn't about income. It was about lifestyle. It was about behavior. It was about choices. So I don't think income and wealth should ever be equated. They have nothing to do with each other. A high income may make it easier to build wealth, but it doesn't guarantee you anything.
No,
So, yeah, I think it's important to make sure that you have something to move towards all the time. No one should have their last goal be, I want the gold watch and the party, and then I no longer am relevant. I've been put out to pasture.
yeah, unfortunately, in our society, that's kind of sometimes the thought process or the philosophy is that we get tied up in perhaps our career or whatever, and then you reach out and that's the end of the road for you.
Well, as Americans, we are inextricably linked from our careers. And if somebody said to you, Tony, who are you? The first thing you're going to think about is what you do. So if somebody asks me, who am I? I'm going to say, oh, I'm a financial advisor. I'm a business owner. Well, wait, I'm also a husband and a father and a son and a brother. I'm also a friend. I'm also a volunteer. I'm also, and you can run right on down the list of all the hats that we wear in our lives, the things that are important to us. And so I am not what I do. I do what I do because I love it and it's in my blood. But that's not who I am. It's a part of who I am. And so it feels to me that it would be much, much better for us not to associate it that way, because then if your identity is tied up in what you do and you stop doing what you do, you've lost your identity. It's not just that you've lost your career, you've lost your entire identity. In a lot of cultures, elders are the most revered in the village. They're the ones you go to with the really complicated problems. In the US, they're put out to pasture. Like, just go away. We've got somebody else coming in to replace you. I don't get it. I don't understand why that is. And the older I get and the closer I get to being of elder status, the more I think elders should be revered. So it's much easier for me to go, hey, that's a really good idea. I may not have thought of that at 25, but right now I'm like, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's move toward that.
Yeah, well, it's all the logic is because experience brings wisdom. There's no
It should.
substitute for experience.
It
But I
should
guess
bring
that's true.
wisdom.
Some people may not learn from their experiences.
I reserve, I try not to make the same mistake twice, Tony, but I reserve the right to make all new mistakes and to make them wildly.
Definitely. And I think that's important, especially for our younger audience members, is that, when you're starting out in your career, or younger in your career, it's okay to make some mistakes and to learn from them. But that is the key, is to learn from them. So that's wonderful
It's
advice.
it's harder than ever to make mistakes, though, because of social media, and here we are, um, because of the camera phones and because of technology and those things. Kids don't get mulligans anymore. You and I growing up did some things that we wouldn't have wanted on Facebook today. And I'm not going to tell you what those things were because they're not on Facebook today. But at the end of the day, we got mulligans because there were 5 people in the room who witnessed something and now it's gone and we can joke about it and laugh about it or whatever. Today, if a kid makes a mistake, it could stick with them. And so if a young professional makes a mistake, particularly an egregious mistake, it can be very tough to get over. There's almost this culture of expecting perfection from everyone. Well, I don't know about you, but I don't know anybody perfect.
Yeah, no. Except my wife is,
You're well trained. You're
yeah,
very well trained. Yeah.
exactly. She's the
Yeah.
smartest woman I know.
Ooh.
So, as we go through it, one of the things we talked about pre-show, and I know it's very important to you, is why do you feel it's so important to bring financial literacy to everyone? And to, as you mentioned, it's a foundational building block.
Without financial literacy, without some basic understanding of the concepts of banking or credit or how money works and what money is, and I don't mean currency, I mean the concept of money. Without some of those basics, it's very difficult to make good decisions. And we're confronted with big decisions, sometimes very young. Think about the decisions that 18-year-olds are making in this country around paying for college. Think about the student loans that kids are taking on today. They're not old enough to have a Budweiser, but they can make a $500,000 financial decision that they're going to live with. Um, on top of that, you then get your first job and you have your employee benefit package and it's dumped in your lap and we need this back on Tuesday. And it's 400 pages of stuff. And I don't know about you, but when I got my first job, I didn't have a clue what to pick. So you ask the person in the cubicle next to you, or you ask your mom or dad or a friend, but you don't necessarily choose the right things because you don't understand what you're doing. Um, Unfortunately, that continues. 19-year-olds with credit cards who really want that pair of skis because they're going on vacation don't realize they might be paying triple for that set of skis because they're going to pay for it for 12 years. So financial literacy to me is just an entry. It's not the be all end all, but you must have it foundationally in order to build financial acumen. So we have a philosophy here in the office and here at the company that if you begin with financial literacy, you can then move into financial planning, and only then can you get toward financial freedom, which ultimately is a wonderful goal, whether you're 45 or 85 years old.
That's great. So, what advice would you give financial advisors who may be looking to integrate more financial education and financial literacy into their planning process? How can they go about that?
Well, I think some of it is partnering. I mean, there are some nonprofits that do some amazing financial literacy work, and you can actually volunteer for those. One of them is Junior Achievement, for example. International organization, does great work, works with young people and their families, and they have financial literacy resources, and there are things that you can learn, and that's in a volunteer capacity. You can then take some of those concepts and bring them into your practice. So if you're working with a couple and they're in their 50s and they've got two kids who are getting out of college, it's it's perfectly fine. In fact, it's recommended. I would recommend to the financial advisors for whom I do consulting that you meet these young people and that you help them with some of these early decisions and that you build a bridge to multi-generational planning. And you're familiar with the red ocean, blue ocean concept, I trust, and that is that with a red ocean, everyone's fighting. All the fish are fighting over the same bait, and that's your 70-year-olds. All these financial advisors are out there fighting over grandma and grandpa because that's where the assets are. Guess what? The assets transfer, and they transfer to the Generation X. And so the Gen Xers and some of the later boomers, some boomers are still in line to inherit money. There's an enormous wealth transfer coming. It's really important as a financial advisor that you know the full family, like you would know the cast of characters in a play. Who are these people? Who are you naming as responsible party in your legal documents? Who's naming you? Are you responsible for your brother and sister-in-law's children if something happens to them? Who are the folks who you're going to rely on if something goes wrong in your financial life or in your medical situation? So it's important to know. It's also important to help with things like estate planning and beneficiary designations and asset titling and liability, stuff that maybe doesn't get talked about at the water cooler because it's not the fun stuff necessarily, although I like it. To me, we talk about the castle and the moat.
Hmm.
In the book, we talk a lot about this, that your wealth and your family and all the things that you hold dear are your castle. That's what you've built. But you wouldn't build a castle in medieval times without a moat, something to protect that castle. Well, in modern life, that moat is liability insurance and other risk management. It's legal documents. It's tax planning. There are ways to keep invaders out. It's cybersecurity. It's identity theft planning or credit monitoring. And so to build this beautiful castle and have this enormous net worth, but then to have some of the gaps in your moat present means you could lose it all over a fender bender. The biggest risk most of us face is being sued. That's the sad reality. So how do you protect yourself against that? And so our job is to protect our clients, but also to educate them. Clients don't want to ruin their kids. If you're worth $10 million and you're going to leave two of your 20 somethings $5 million apiece, barring some major education or legal documents or other either restrictions or guidance, they're going to mess that up. Not in every case, but in most cases. If I had received that kind of money in my 20s, I don't think I would have handled it the way I would if it was today. Today, I would know what to do. Then I would have had a ball, but it wouldn't have been the best thing. And that's not to disparage young people. It's just these are decisions and these are things they sometimes get faced with that they're not prepared for. They've never practiced it. And so for younger people and for financial advisors, it's important to work with the next generation. It's also incredibly important to have advisors in your firm who are members of that generation, because kids don't want to work with their parents' advisors. They don't. They'll work with the same organization, the same firm, but they want to work with somebody. The Gen Zs want to work with millennials. The millennials might want to work with millennials, maybe Xers. But it's important for your advisor to be of similar age in a perfect sense, so that you have some of the same experiences. You can relate to each other. It's also helpful to have advisors younger than you as a planner, because you can explain to clients that we're spending all this time talking about what if something happens to you. Well, let me tell you what happens if something happens to me. And that is a very big deal too for financial advisors.
Yeah, well, I think that's some food for thought, is because, a lot of advisors I know, of course, as you mentioned, are my peers. And, if you're a peer, it's a good idea to be thinking about that, about your business continuation strategy, but it's really your client continuation strategy. You're not just doing it for your business, as you're doing it for your clients. Uh, what happens to your clients and their financial plan if something were to happen to you? Could somebody else step in and manage your client's financial plan?
Well,
So,
emphatically, I can answer that question with an emphatic yes. But a lot of advisors can't. A lot of advisory practices, and for most financial advisors, your practice is your biggest asset. Talk about the castle. It's worth more than your home. It's worth more than your 401k. It's worth more than your real estate assets. In most cases, your most valuable asset is your practice, and ultimately your ability to earn. And your ability to earn is it's not linear, but it is a decreasing, it's a decreasing piece, because you hit your max earning years at a given point, 55, 60. And then at some point, a lot of times that starts to pare back. Now, if you're in an abundance mentality and you have built a firm that can sustain beyond you, that doesn't have to be true. But your most valuable asset's your practice. What would you like to do with your most valuable asset when something happens to you? And if you are the asset and something happens to you, the asset's gone. So succession planning makes sense, and it's scary. I started selling stock in our firm in my 30s, and people thought I was nuts. But I have partners now who are magnificent, who could step in. And not only would it create continuity for our clients, the ones I represent, if something happens to me, it also allows me to get real vacations. It changed my life. I became a dad, and my wife and I wanted to have vacations, and I wanted to take spring breaks, and I wanted to go to amusement parks and to the beach and whatever else. And when I was a sole practitioner, it was almost impossible to get away for a day and a half, much less a week or more. And now I take most of the summer off.
that's great. And I think that's a good lesson for everybody, to make sure you have that time off. Just a quick reminder, if you're watching this on Facebook Live and you have a question for Eric, go ahead and put it in the comments, and the question will appear magically on the show, and Eric will take your question. So please feel free to ask him anything. And then we're going to start talking a little bit about Eric's book. Eric, can you tell us about your book, Don't Retire, Graduate, Building a Path to Financial Freedom at Any Age?
Yeah, this is the third book I've written, and I think the last book I'm planning to write, because it took 3 years of my life to put this together. But it's been written to be like a college curriculum. Every chapter is a course, and it's cash management 101 and debt management 101 and risk management and investment planning and so forth. And I did it this way because life is not linear. And so it's important to be able to meet a client or a reader where they are. So if someone 20 picks up this book, they're likely to start at the piece um, on on college savings and on debt and on getting your first job. If they're a little older in their lives, they might want to gravitate to the chapter of how do you plan for marriage or for children or for buying your first home. And so each of these things have been set up, and it's not a textbook. It's written like a college syllabus, but it's written in the first person. It's a very easy read. I'm getting wonderful reviews and feedback about it because it's not a textbook. There's not a ton of jargon. It's designed as a financial literacy tool for anyone. It is truly for anyone at any age and at any level of wealth because, starting to make good decisions and talking about some of the things to think about has nothing to do with how big your account is. It has everything to do with where you are in your life and what's important to you. And so the book actually takes us right up through graduation. And that's where we start talking about the decisions you have to make before your quote unquote retirement and as you retire and then beyond. And we start to talk about what is more important than money. There's so many things, legacies and stories and history. And it's not about stuff. It's about the things that made you you. And that's your own shot, I think, at immortality. It's not about slapping your name on a building. It's about leaving something behind of lasting value. And that doesn't have to be monetary value. So it's really about having an amazing third chapter of your 3-chapter life. Because if the first 30 years are your childhood, your adolescence, and your young adulthood, and 30 to 60 is your middle-aged years, for lack of a more graceful term, or at least it's your peak earning years most of the time, and then 60 to 90 plus, it's a 30-year life, and it's making sure that that 30-year life is as rewarding and active and spectacular as the first two.
Well, that's great. And I know that one of the things you talk about in your book is that the concept of retirement is outdated. Why do you say that the concept of retirement is outdated?
Well, primarily because the concept of retirement hasn't changed much since 1860. So I would argue that's outdated. In 1860, Otto von Bismarck came up with the idea of retirement. And one of the things he said is that people should be pleased with the retirement they are cast into. That sounds terrible. That's doing something to someone, not for them. And that was 150 plus years ago, 160 years ago. In the early 1900s, the founders of Johns Hopkins here in Baltimore, there was a gentleman named Osler for whom a building on the campus and at the hospital is named. And he put together a landscape for people that basically said from 20 to 40, you are highly useful. Beyond 40, you're just sort of okay. And at 60, you're useless.
Wow.
I believe the word he used was useless. And so the idea of retirement then moved on to Social Security. Well, Social Security was designed, think about what it is. On your pay stub, it's OASDI. It's the Old Age Survivor and Disability Income Program. It was for the extreme elderly as a safety net so that you weren't impoverished in your dying days. And the retirement world was set up as what was called the 3-legged stool. You had your pension, which just about everybody had. You had your Social Security, and then you had whatever personal savings you put together. And Tony, at the time, the rule of thumb was you needed 10% of your retirement income to come from your own money. The rest of it was going to be your employer or the government. 10%. Today, Social Security is totally different. And unfortunately, the ages haven't changed. A lot of the policies haven't changed. The only thing they've changed materially about Social Security, they made the age a little older. And they made your Social Security income taxable for most people. So you're not paying taxes on your taxes. But when Social Security was created, people would hit the workforce at 18. Most people didn't go to college. They got jobs at 18 and they worked until they were 60 or 65 and they were dead at 72. So they had a 50-year career almost and a 7-year retirement. Today, people don't hit the workforce till 22, 23, 25. Not only do they not hit the workforce till they're 25, but they're in debt. They owe 20, 30, 50, $100,000 in education. So they're not even entering the workforce at even. They're in the red. They want to retire at 55 and could live to be 107. It's just the math doesn't work. You can't do that. So retirement it's changed because most people don't have pensions anymore. Social Security is not only tenuous, but it's a very minor piece for most people who've worked their whole lives. And you have to save almost all of it yourself. So I tell millennials and Gen Zs and even some Xers that the three-legged stool has been replaced by a yo-yo. That is the new icon of retirement. It's a yo-yo, and it stands for you're on your own. Because what's coming from your employer is virtually nil. People don't work for 30 years for a company and then retire with a gold watch and a pension. They work for 3 years, 4 years, 8 years for a company, and then they move to another company. Sometimes they vest in their benefits. Oftentimes they don't. There's no gold watch. There's no pension. And Social Security is covering 15 or 20% or less for most middle and upper middle class folks. If that's true, then you have to save for yourself and you have to build financial independence for yourself. And the only reason we think of retirement age as 67 is because that's what Social Security says the retirement age is. Who says you have to retire at 67? You could work to be 83. I've had guests on the podcast on Don't Retire, Graduate who are in their 80s who help octogenarians figure out ways either to make money or just to stay busy. They start businesses. They're dog walkers. They're doing something that they love to do anyway, and they're getting paid to do it. I've had other guests on who, one of them had her 93-year-old mother who didn't want to stop living, create a list of 100 things she wanted to do before she died. And by gosh, she did them all and wrote a book about it. She was in her 90s. So why are we thinking of 67 as the end of the road? And the only thing I can think of, number one, it's what the government says retirement age is, which to me doesn't matter. And number two, it's because a lot of people still work in jobs they hate and they can't wait to be done. And if you can't wait, you're watching the clock for Friday at 5 and you're living for those weekends and the long weekends and so forth, you're probably in the wrong job. And if you have the ability and the opportunity, you're better off a lot of times changing jobs and finding something you love to do so it doesn't feel like work. It's not misery. And that's not possible for everybody. And I know that. That's for everybody has different opportunities. That's true. But if we consider that education is changing and we consider that the workforce is changing, I think the millennials really were onto something with side hustles. And I think Gen Z is going to perfect it and take it even further. They're all free agents and they know it. And it's not a bad thing.
Definitely. And, as we talk about this, I'm thinking about some of the other authors I've had on here and the statistics about how women earn less during their career. They take on more burdens as a caregiver, and they also have a longer life expectancy. How do women think about these concepts? How is the concept of retirement even so different for a woman, given these parameters?
Well, it's different because of decades of father knows best and leave it to Beaver, which I'm delighted to say is no longer the norm. I think there is a tendency, and it's less so now that it's all women, because there is a tendency for one parent to stay home, and it tends to be the mother in most cases, though not all cases. And sometimes a couple, a couple of my very closest friends are stay-home dads. And their wives are very successful humans and make a lot of money as doctors or lawyers or what have you. And so it certainly exists. But you're right, women tend to earn less than men, and which is one of the reasons why I love our business, because that's not true in our business for people who are entrepreneurial. There are some unbelievably successful women in our business. In fact, our 8 advisors in our firm, we have 4 men and 4 women here. Our principals, 2 men and 2 women. We have terrific diversity. We have terrific opportunities, and the women don't under-earn the men. So that I'm very, very happy about. And they also don't underproduce or under-thrive or underwork their male counterparts. I happen to think women are naturally suited as financial advisors. I think financial advisors really have two roles, two hats to wear. One of them is quantifiable. It's the math. The more important one is the relationship. And whether you and I like to admit it or not, women are so much more adept at that naturally. Men have to work at it. And I'm overgeneralizing, and that's not fair, but let's go with it. Women are so much better at building relationships that are meaningful than men are. Men, for a long time, they were hunters, not gatherers, right? I mean, we're going back 100,000 years. Some of that hasn't changed. Some of that's just wiring. Some of it is society. But I think women make better financial advisors than men on average. And I think it's very tough to get into this business. This business is still like 88% male. That's mind blowing to me. But I don't think it starts with the business. I think it starts in school. Girls historically have been told they're not good at math. Well, we've debunked that. STEM has debunked that. And for women who want to be engineers and scientists and mathematicians and economists, they can do all of those things now and could always do all of those things. They were just told they weren't going to be good at them, so they didn't even pursue them. Same thing's true, by the way, with people of color. A lot of times, these folks don't even go to the job interview or when it comes to financial careers. And it's strange to me because there's no reason why anyone can't thrive in this environment just by building relationships, surrounding yourself with good people, and then doing the right thing. And so this business has been very male and very white for a very long time. The pendulum is definitely swinging. And I say that that's a positive because a lot of people want to work with, folks with whom they have enough in common to have a bond. And that doesn't mean that you're going to deliberately, there are some women who probably would prefer to have a female advisor. Most probably don't care. There are some men who might want a male advisor. Most of them don't care. There's going to be some, but I think for the most part, the women, particularly the women in our office, are extraordinary, and they're fabulous financial planners, terrific business partners, incredible entrepreneurs, and just great people. And they weren't chosen because of gender. It's not like we went out and said, "Hey, we need to find some female advisors." That's not what we did. We said, we want to find some great advisors. And the fact that we have done that and that half of our advisors are women, it's an accident, but a glorious one.
That's great. And just as a reminder to our audience, if you have any questions, please leave your questions in the Facebook comments. And, Eric, those are some very interesting points. And, one of the things is from talking to especially a lot of the female authors is sometimes they feel like it's harder to find those opportunities. Do you have any advice, from what you've seen in your experience in the financial industry, how women can break through to become advisors rather than portfolio assistants or some of the other roles? How can they, break through?
Well, first, they have to not place any constraints on themselves. If this is what you want to do for a living, go get it. So let's begin with attitude. Attitude's not enough by itself, but without it, I think you're sunk. The second thing is I think it's really important for any, particularly young people who want to enter this business, to find a mentor, to find someone more senior to them, to pick brains. In my 20s, I asked anyone and everyone who is in this business, how did you do it? What worked for you? I built study groups and made sure I had a very large group of folks whose ears I could bend when I needed to. And now I'm on the receiving end of those requests constantly, and I'm honored by it, and I absolutely pay it back. So I think it's important to find a mentor. I had a mentor. I had someone who really taught me the ropes. I spent 4 years learning the ropes with him. And ultimately, when I started my own shop, I was incredibly ready for it because I had done it before. And I knew how to do this. And it wasn't that, and he would freely tell you, it's not that he was a great teacher or a great coach. I just watched someone great at what they do it. And so for young women who want to get into this career, for any young person, but particularly for women, I would say it's important to find a mentor. Um, if you're able to find a female advisor who's successful and terrific and who wants to mentor you, that's great. But I wouldn't limit yourself that way. I would say that there's an incredible group of financial advisors. Certainly, the Females in Finance group is full of them, but there are other places to look as well. And I don't think you should limit yourself in terms of who your mentor is. Find someone with whom you philosophically connect and learn, watch, grow, educate. Um, and then there's a third step to this. If the first step is not to limit yourself with your attitude, and your second step is to find a mentor, the third step is very much a spot where I think some people get caught up, and that's to ask for it. You know, there's this idea that women are paid less than men because they're less likely to be assertive and to ask for a raise. I don't know if that's true or not, or if it's anecdotal, or if it's bunk. But if there's something to that, what it means is that if you're always going to have trouble getting what you don't ask for, what you don't seek, it's not going to just show up on your doorstep. So I think it's okay to find a mentor. I think it's okay to push him or her to teach you. Be an apprentice for a year or two out of school. You don't have to make a lot of money in your 20s. You can make a lot of money the rest of your life. In your 20s, you need to learn and you need to grow professionally, and it's more than a textbook. So now for career changers, totally different. For folks who are 45 and want to enter this business as a second career, and they've been in banking or in law or in anything, in any small business, male or female, I still think it's really important if you're entering this industry, it's really important to find somebody who's been doing it a long time, who's willing and who's innovative about it. You know, not somebody who's doing it a way that doesn't exist anymore, but somebody who's innovative about it, and pick lots of brains. Once COVID's over, go to the networking meetings, meet the other financial advisors in your community. Use Females in Finance. I'll bet any member in this group would take a call from another member of this group who just wanted to ask for some career advice or some suggestions or some pointers. I mean, this is an incredibly supportive organization. I think it's full of remarkable people, authors, financial advisors, economists, business owners, and use the community. It's here.
Definitely. Yeah. And I would agree. If you're part of the Females in Finance community and you haven't posted yet, if you're looking for help or you're looking for advice, I would strongly recommend you post. Check out the news feed, and you'll see that there's, sometimes 20 or 30 responses when somebody posts with a question or, posts that you need help. That's, Females in Finance is that community where you can tap into the experience and wisdom. So that's fantastic. So Dave, you've written 3 books. I know some of the people out there in the audience that I've talked to, they go, boy, maybe it's time for me to write a book, or, how do you find that inspiration? What inspired you to be an author?
I think part of it was, as an English major, I always loved to write. A lot of financial advisors who want to be authors really want ghostwriters. They want to get their ideas out there and have someone else write them, which is fine. You can certainly do that. I wrote it because it was fun for me. And the third one was probably the least fun. The first one was the most fun because I'd never done it before. It was a new adventure. The third one was the least fun, partly because I wanted to learn from mistakes that I had made, publishing mistakes, design mistakes, monetization mistakes, even mistakes in the content. And I don't mean factual mistakes. I mean just design mistakes. I wanted to learn from it. I really wanted to put something out that would be a tool that would be incredibly helpful to folks. And personal finance is an unbelievably crowded space. Everybody and their brother has a book on personal, and there's so many. It's so crowded. And so trying to create something different is really difficult. So if you're thinking of writing a book, first of all, don't do it alone. Have some resources, hire a publisher, work with editors, figure out how to do this right, because mistakes are really expensive. And if you plan to self-publish, which quite frankly, I think is better than some of the other arrangements, unless you're planning to be a New York Times bestseller, which most of us won't be. Unless you're planning to do that, remember what the book is designed to do. For a financial advisor or other professionals, a book generates some credibility. It's certainly not the only way to do that. It's a very time-consuming way to do that, in fact, but it creates some credibility. It creates a calling card. It creates a resource. For me, I wanted it to create a brand. And so I tied the book and the podcast together. The podcast started 3 years ago. The book came out in October of 2020. We just published the workbook a couple of days ago, actually. There's a workbook to go with the book, which is all of the exercises. Nobody likes homework, Tony. So what I decided to do with the book was to create an extra credit assignment at the end of every chapter. People don't do homework, but they always do extra credit. At least I thought they did. My daughter doesn't always do her extra credit, to my chagrin, but extra credit's a whole lot more fun. So if you go through these, there's 21 exercises. And if you were to go through them and really work this, this piece, what you'd find is you had a financial plan at the end. It's a recipe to have a path to financial freedom. It's not going to get you there by itself, but there's chapters in here, there's pieces in here about the kinds of questions to ask a financial advisor before you hire him or her. Like, how do you know what you need to know about this person's practice or this firm? And that's an important piece of this, because not everyone should do it themselves. The fact that I can go to Home Depot and buy anything I need does not qualify me as a home builder. I could do it. I'm sure somewhere out there, there's a how to build your own home, and I could go get some plywood and some concrete and get started. I'm not going to. And for some people, building a financial plan is similar. They're busy as dentists or teachers or entrepreneurs. They don't want to be financial advisors, even for themselves, or they would be. So for most of the public, it's real important to understand which part of it is commoditized. Which part can you get anywhere? A computer program can do it. And which part is the more important, in my opinion, the human part, the behavioral part, the sounding board. Is this a good decision? A computer algorithm cannot do that. Robots cannot do that. They can't empathize. They can't understand the human experience. And even if AI gets good enough that they think they can, they can't. Because all of our experiences are unique. And having some ability just to listen and the ability to relate is why I'm not afraid of robo-advisors. Robo-advisors are great. And for people who either can't afford to use a financial advisor firm, which I'd also like to debunk in some ways, we can talk about that if you'd like. But for folks who either think they can't or truly can't afford, there are tools out there. And they can be software tools, they can be online tools, some of them are free, some of them are inexpensive, some of them are more expensive. It's better to do that than to do nothing. But TurboTax did not replace CPAs. And robo-advisors are not going to replace quality financial advisors who have built relationships with families. A robo can't possibly explain how grandma's going to feel about sending her granddaughter to college, or the difficulty in determining how to handle a family business or a family farm, or special needs situations, or gambling issues, or drug addiction issues, or all the things that life throws at us. So it's important as a financial advisor not only to guide and to do the math. And we talked about the two roles. One is the math. Fine. Mm-hmm. You can, if you have an aptitude for arithmetic, you can do that. And if you don't, you can hire somebody. I'd rather find someone who's incredibly wonderful with people and teach them the planning than somebody who's really terrific with a spreadsheet, but has no bedside manner.
Well, I heard a lot of things in there that I think are so valuable for people to be able to take, whether they're in their own practice, whether they're running a business or working for a firm, is, to establish your brand that a book is a tool for establishing a brand. It's a tool for getting your voice out, and that no matter what role you have, if you're a floor trader, if you're a securities analyst, if you're a financial planner, that it's about putting nuance and context to what you do and going beyond just the numbers.
Absolutely.
And getting that wisdom, as you mentioned. So I want to get in a couple quick questions just
Sure.
to, as we wrap up. Can you tell us a
This
little?
is the lightning round.
This is
Are there
the lightning round.
are there bonus points in the lightning round? I like
Uh,
bonus points.
we'll have to talk to Cheryl about that. She assigns all the bonus points.
All right, Cheryl, you heard it here first. All right,
Definitely.
shoot.
So, I want to make sure we hit on your podcast.
Yeah.
Don't retire, graduate. Tell us a little bit about that and why you started a podcast.
I started a podcast because I had guested on a number of podcasts and realized the incredible power that they could have, not only for reaching the public, but also for building a brand. So I attended a conference. I attended a FinCon conference in 2017. And the conference is about where money and media meet. And I walked around and I really didn't know what I was doing there. I had never done anything like that. In fact, just doing a show like this is something that 3 years ago I hadn't done. So I wanted to understand what it was about. And I met some folks. And I actually, 2 years after I was wandering around there, not knowing why I was there, I was actually asked to speak at FinCon 19. And so I've posted on our consulting website, I've posted that talk because it talks about how financial advisors can go from being influence to being authorities. I'm sorry, boy, I messed that up. How to go from being authorities to being influencers. Because what happens is we're all authorities in our subject. We know what we know because of our educations, but a lot of us can't influence decision making or the public. Podcasts are great at doing that. And so I was able to give a talk about that. I was able to then build my own show and tie it to the book. We release a new show every Thursday on Apple Podcasts and Stitcher and Spotify and all these things. I have a fabulous production team that does a great job, and they're offsite. I built a very small studio that I'm sitting in now that was not expensive, and that allows for good sound and good sight for those shows if there's video. And it's been fun, and we have really seen an uptick. We now have 10,000 or so folks download episodes, which is an amazing thing. And we've absolutely made new client relationships as a result of the podcast. And the podcast is all about finding ways to graduate into retirement, whether that's figuring out what you want to be when you grow up. And when was the last time somebody asked you, Tony, what do you want to be when you grow up? You were 7 and you said, I want to be an astronaut. Now, I think it's okay to ask adult people what they want to be when they grow up and to watch the look and say, oh, wow, I hadn't really thought of that. I thought I was up. And if you're not growing, you're dying. So the show is about ways to do that. And some of it's about financial independence and some of it's a little technical. Some of it's about things like how do you create a legacy? How do you make sure that that your kids and your grandkids remember your parents or yourselves? What kind of videos or what kind of tools do you want to put out so that there's a continuum, and what kind of stories do you want shared with your family members eternally? And so it's a conversation. We have guests on every other week for about a half hour, and it's been fun. And you can find it at don'tretiregraduate.com, or you can go to brotmanmedia.com and find all of the podcast episodes, the books, some white papers, some free resources. It's all available there.
That's fantastic. And of course, you're active on the Facebook page, so I'm sure people can reach out to you as well through Facebook.
Absolutely.
To connect.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and then we'll be posting in the library form on the Females in Finance website. So as we wrap up, what's your number one tip for women working in financial services?
That is an extremely difficult question because it forces me to distill this down to one thing. And I think the number one tip I would give to women working in this business is to be authentic, to always, always be true to yourself, and don't try and be something you're not, whatever that is. And I think that's true for everyone, not necessarily just for women, but there's a tendency to think that if you're going to be a financial advisor, you have to fit this sort of mold, this stereotype. Well, Gordon Gekko's long gone, thankfully. So instead of trying to fit this narrative of what you think a financial advisor should be, just be authentic, be yourself. People will do business with you because they like and trust you, or they will choose to do business with someone else, and that's okay. There's an incredible shortage of financial advisors in this country, and an even bigger shortage of good ones. We are not each other's competition. Someone who chooses to do business with me is choosing that not because they don't like you, but because they connected with me. And the same thing's true in reverse. So rather than thinking of it as a competition or I've got to beat the other guy or gal, just be authentic, and people they'll gravitate to you, and you'll wind up building, I think, building an incredible practice by accident. It's by accident on purpose, Tony. What I mean by that is you don't necessarily know where your next client or your next growth is going to come from. You can try to plan that out, but you don't always know. But the number one thing I'd say for women in financial services is to be authentic. And if I'm allowed to have a 1B, I'm going to go back to what I said before about the glass ceiling and the pay differentials and so forth. And that is, go for it. Don't be hesitant. Don't be reticent. Don't be shy. Go get it. Because if you know what you're doing and you care about people, the public and your prospective clients will see that, and they will gravitate to you, and they will do business with you.
Well, that's fantastic. And for 1A and 1B, those are both great tips, is to be yourself. And life is easier when you're being authentic. You don't have to consider all the other aspects.
Some people, and I think I was guilty of this myself early in my career. You put on your uniform to go to work, right? And if you're a professional athlete and you put a helmet on to go to work, you're liable to be different at work than you are at home, I would hope. If you're a firefighter and you're putting a helmet on to go to work, or if you're putting on a uniform for whatever it is that you do, and for us, that uniform was the blue suit, the white shirt, the red tie, the cufflinks, the power tie. Like, why? First of all, people hate that. It's off-putting. It's amazing. I look back on almost 3 decades of this, and I used to spend so much time and probably money, I don't even want to think about it, trying to look the part when all I had to do was be myself. And that's why I say to someone in the business or coming into the business, just be yourself and be great.
That's fantastic. Well, Eric, thank you so much for joining us today on Meet the Author. It was a real pleasure.
Thanks. It's been fun, Tony.
Yeah, thank you. And to everyone, thanks for tuning in today to Meet the Author, sponsored by Paperwork. Please be sure to join us for our next Meet the Author session with Mike Skripnik on March 19th. Until next time.
Thanks for listening. Looking for more information about today's author, or interested in joining the Females in Finance networking community? Be sure to subscribe at www.femalesinfinance.com.